Hey, RetconRaider here, with another video about Phoenix Point. Before we dive in, I'd just like to say that today's video is dedicated to two of my patrons, Nazzul and Forbidden One. Thanks for your support, guys. That said, let's get started. Well, it's been a while, but with the recent release of Backer Build 3, it's finally time to take a look back at everything we've learned about Phoenix Point over the past couple of months. Now, I ended up skipping the update in September because, I'll be honest here, there just wasn't anything to talk about. The development team was simply so busy working on Backer Build 3 that they just didn't have time to give us any significant new updates. The one thing they did end up releasing was this enigmatic teaser image, which appears to showcase an extreme close-up of a new Pandora virus mutant's face. We don't really have much to go on here, but current popular theory is that this thing might be a mutated turtle. Fortunately, things really ended up picking up speed once we got into October, as the developers started gearing up for the inevitable release of Backer Build 3, which officially released on October 12th. Suffice to say, the new Backer build contains placeholders and early rudimentary versions of several new mechanics, including the geoscape, global exploration, the soldier loadouts and squad management systems, new maps and mission types, and so on. I won't go over everything here, but if you'd like to actually see it all in action, feel free to check out the official live stream from Snapshot Games. Or, my own gameplay videos about Backer Build 3. For now, though, let's stay focused on some of the more intriguing pieces of new content, such as the terrifying new enemies. Obviously, Backer Build 3 still features some of the enemies that we've grown accustomed to over the past few builds. The iconic crabmen are still front and center, serving as the rank-and-file cannon fodder for the Pandora virus, while the Crab Queen has received several new powerful upgrades, but has also been turned into a much rarer encounter. Those are both pretty familiar faces by this point, but they're now joined by two new types of enemies, the agile and insidious Mindfragger larvae, and the massive, towering Sentinels. Now, we talked about the Mindfragger larvae back in the August update, but this is the first time we've actually gotten to see them in action. They've obviously gone through a few revisions since the last batch of concept art, and the newly updated designs are more compact, more streamlined, and somewhat reminiscent of the infamous brain suckers featured in XCOM Apocalypse. This new version of the Mindfragger is small and extremely agile, zipping across the battlefield until it gets close enough to literally launch its head at an unsuspecting target. While this does cause the larva's body to die, the head will then assume control of the soldier it's now attached to, requiring the player to either incapacitate their newly compromised squad mate, or to, carefully remove the Mindfragger from their face. Not only does the Crab Queen now have access to a new mutation that can allow her to spawn Mindfraggers in mid-battle, but if the player decides to raid an alien base, then they're all but certain to encounter numerous Mindfragger eggs. These eggs essentially serve as stationary hazards, remaining dormant until they're either attacked or an unwary soldier gets too close. Then, much like in the Aliens franchise that clearly inspired them, the Mindfragger eggs will crack open, unleashing a newly hatched Mindfragger on the truly unfortunate soldier that triggered it. Of course, a single Mindfragger is relatively easy to deal with, but Mindfragger eggs will usually be encountered in clusters. Even worse, they'll sometimes also be accompanied by another new type of enemy, the massive, jellyfish-like, hatching Sentinel. Now, there are actually 3 different types of Sentinels featured in Backer Build 3, each with their own distinct special ability. These things essentially serve as organic security systems, deploying very specific countermeasures once they become aware of intruders. In the case of the hatching Sentinel, it will spend 1 turn powering up before unleashing an electrical blast, which will instantly activate any nearby eggs. While the hatching Sentinel itself can't actually hurt the player's soldiers directly, the swarms of Mindfraggers or other alien minions that it can end up activating can easily end up overwhelming an unprepared squad. The second type of Sentinel, and the only one that can be encountered outside of alien bases, is the Mist Sentinel, a massive, vaguely mushroom-like tower that will vomit up a cloud of microbial mist when disturbed. It will then continue pouring out more and more mist in subsequent turns, steadily covering the battlefield, unless the player can somehow stop it. Again, much like the hatching sentinel, this thing doesn't really pose a direct threat to the player, but the mist it conjures up can certainly complicate things on the battlefield. It essentially acts as a selective fog of war, blocking the player's line of sight but allowing the enemies to see right through it. It also boosts the willpower of any mutant that takes cover in it, while sapping the will of any soldiers who are caught in its area of effect. Even worse, in the final game, the microbial mist will not only mutate to provide additional powerful buffs to nearby mutants, but it will also be able to infect nearby soldiers with the Pandora virus. Oh, and this is probably a good time to mention that one of the Crab Queen's other new mutations allows her to spew out massive clouds of microbial mist as well. The third and perhaps most visually distinct of the new Sentinels is the aptly named Terror Sentinel, which can currently be encountered guarding alien bases. These massive conjoined triplets share some visual similarities with another classic creature from XCOM Apocalypse, in this case the Spitters, but their behavior is distinctly different. In the current backer build, these creatures will wait until they've detected nearby intruders, at which point they'll emit a powerful area attack that can shake a soldier's will and quickly cause them to panic. Although these creatures aren't much of a threat from far away, they can be quite devastating up close, which is probably why they're currently only encountered in the narrow, claustrophobic tunnels of the alien facilities. Oh, and it's also worth noting that while these creatures are currently stationary threats, some of the earlier concept art actually showed them with crab-like legs. It's possible that these things might actually mutate over time, just like most of the other enemies in the game, eventually evolving into a more mobile threat. Sadly, one creature that didn't quite make the cut for Backer Build 3 was the oft-teased Chiron, something which Snapshot Games recently offered a rather tongue-in-cheek apology for. Although originally planned for Backer Build 3, the Chirons weren't quite ready in time for release, so we'll likely see them in either a future content patch for the current Backer Build, or in Backer Build 4, which is tentatively slated for release in January. As we know, these bulky beasts will take up 4 spaces on the battle grid, essentially acting as living mobile artillery, providing the aliens with a direct counter to heavily armored vehicles like the Armadillo. Although the developers have been pretty cagey about the specifics, they've previously mentioned that the Chiron will have access to different types of living munitions, including the dreaded Fireworm, another minion-type enemy that they've teased in previous updates. Another bit of content that wasn't quite ready for release with Backer Build 3 are the new Phoenix Project versions of the basic Assault, Heavy, and Sniper classes. Instead, the new Backer Build continues to make use of the more polished new Jericho assets, though with some slightly updated appearances and some new abilities to play with. Most of these new abilities allow the player to make extra attacks at the cost of will points, though in some cases they can be real game changers. The Heavy's new Rage Burst ability, for example, allows them to empty their entire magazine in a single action, dragging fire along a predetermined line and potentially mowing down multiple enemies with a single attack. The developers also snuck in several new pieces of Phoenix Project equipment, which the player can salvage while they're out in the field. This includes the PX-01 hand grenade, the PX-HG-1 pistol, the PX-SG-3 Mercy shotgun, the PX-X2 stun rod, and my personal favorite, the PX-LD Firecat grenade launcher. This actually gives us our first in-game look at several new weapon categories, with the shotgun, grenade launcher, and even the humble stun rod, all providing new tactical options on the battlefield. Even the previously existing equipment has gotten a visual upgrade, with a lot of the weapons and armor previously featured in Backer Build 2 getting a more refined, detailed appearance, and in some cases, added functionality. The Technician's turret, for example, not only has a sleek new look, but it's also automatically recovered after a successful field mission, allowing the Technician to deploy it again in future missions. Perhaps the most notable piece of new equipment included in Backer Build 3 is the Phoenix Project's new Manticore dropship, which was first teased in a new piece of concept art by Lars Corneliusson. Although we know the player will initially only have access to a small, short-range helicopter, it seems likely that the player will gain access to the Manticore relatively early in the game. It appears to be a fairly standard medium-range transport, similar to the iconic Sky Ranger that was featured in the XCOM franchise. It can carry up to 8 soldiers at a time, or 4 soldiers and a single armored car, though it's certainly possible that different types of vehicles will take up different amounts of space. Beyond that, the developers have started teasing us with other bits and pieces of future content, such as the wide variety of new environmental concept art that Lars has recently uploaded to his ArtStation account. This includes things like residential zones, factory and industrial equipment, and heavy-duty research equipment, mostly intended for use in New Jericho havens. But community manager Kevin Hill has stressed that they're still planning to have a distinct, unique style for each of the different factions' havens. He even went so far as to share some of the potential faction interactions that the developers are currently discussing. For example, he mentioned that captured havens will likely still retain their original architectural style, but will be updated with new accessories to clearly display the faction that currently controls it. Likewise, he also stated that while the player can steal or otherwise acquire unique faction-based research and technology from the other factions, those factions won't be able to steal research from each other. That's intended to help each faction retain their distinctly unique theme and appearance on the battlefield, rather than allowing them to evolve and merge until they're difficult to actually differentiate. Another thing the developers have recently started teasing us with is the newly updated Siren, now completely rendered by Georgi Peplano, the same artist who also helped design the Chirons and the 3 new Sentinels. Although we still don't know much about the Siren, we do know that she's gone through some pretty significant visual redesign since her first appearance, all the way back during the original Fig campaign. Much like the Mindfragger and Terror Sentinel, the newly updated Siren shares several striking similarities to another classic XCOM enemy. In this case, the somewhat infamous Snake Men, a staple of the terror missions featured in UFO Defense. While there's certainly a lot to take in about her new design, perhaps her most striking feature is the particularly bizarre shape of her head, which the developers have even drawn deliberate attention towards. Given her name and visual appearance, the most obvious speculation revolves around her making use of some sort of psychic or sonic-based attacks. Personally, my currently favored theory is that she might be able to captivate or otherwise paralyze your soldiers, before closing in and casually tearing them to pieces. Finally, while things have been pretty quiet on the fiction front since the release of Briefing Number 6, Alan Stroud and Jonas Kairatzis aren't quite finished just yet. News stories, in the form of newspaper articles and personal correspondence, have started appearing on the official website, categorized as fragments. Although not nearly as ambitious as the briefings, these news stories are intended to help further expand the lore, providing additional details and context for the events leading up to the beginning of the game. It's also worth mentioning that Snapshot Games has recently started uploading new music tracks by their in-house sound designer, Simeon Dotcob, which you can listen to over on Snapshot Games' official YouTube channel. Simeon's the composer behind all the music currently being used in the trailers and backer builds, and while it was originally intended to be temporary, it's now been announced that Simeon's music will be featured in the final game, alongside the music being composed by XCOM alumni John Broomhall. And, well, that's it. That's everything we learned about Phoenix Point throughout September and October. And given that we're now headed into the holidays, I suspect things are likely to get a bit quiet over the next few weeks. Not too quiet, though, because we do have Backer Build 4 tentatively slated for release in January of 2019. But for now, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Phoenix Point, you can find out more about the game by visiting the official website, the official Facebook page, the official Twitter feed, the official Discord channel, the official YouTube channel, or the original crowdfunding campaign over on Fig. You can also get access to the latest backer build for yourself by pre-ordering the game over on the official Snapshot store. As always, links are in the description.